Welcome everyone to Literary Conversations Across Borders, a chance to prove that we can still stay connected and informed and even perhaps a little entertained even during this unprecedented global lockdown. And it literally is literary conversations across borders, as we have about 1,500 people registered for this event from 59 countries. So welcome everyone. We have two wonderful guests to whom I'll get to in just a moment. I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed seeing the blue skies and the lack of pollution and traffic being replaced by empty roads and the odd wild animal crossing over to see what's going on in human urban life, unlike they usually get the chance to. And that literally is the point. Earth is carrying on without us, and the environment has changed completely. Now, let's ignore the downsides, though, because, of course, we have some serious consequences. The global economy has taken a massive hit that will leave many people struggling to make a living, and agricultural resources and food security has seen an impact that will give us possible food for thought, literally. Plus, wildlife may be feeling rather liberated at the moment, but conservation has taken quite a hit too. The risk of greater risk coming from a lack of protection, with rangers not being able to get out and about as much as they've been able to in the past. And of course, the serious issue of funding in threat as fundraising events are being cancelled, and a lot of companies that do support wildlife conservation having to rethink their resources as well. So it makes us wonder, what are the gains versus the losses? And it brings us to our serious question, the big question: sustainability. Have we pulled back from the brink? Well, let me introduce our two wonderful guests, both of whom I might point out are from the more sensible gender, as I like to think of it. Her Excellency Mariam bint Mohammed Mehairi is the United Arab Emirates Minister of State for Food Security. I'm not going to go into a long bio about her, but it's great to have with us one of the UAE's young, dynamic government team who heads up a portfolio that's obviously growing rapidly in importance. And with us, of course, is a truly remarkable person who has an unnatural energy matched to her remarkable brain and true commitment to the planet. And I've had the honor of interviewing her on a number of occasions. So I'm really glad to welcome Dr. Jane Goodall, one of the world's leading environmental scientists. And again, you can look her up online if you want to see all the achievements, the awards, and the books and videos that have been done about her as well. There are going to be lots of questions to ask, and of course, including ones you have sent us too, so we will get your participation involved. But I want to welcome the Minister and Dr. Goodall to the conversation.
Thank you.
I'm presuming you can hear me okay, good, thanks. I'm going to start off with a question to both of you, and perhaps, Minister, I can start with you. There's that saying, I have good news and I have bad news. I'm going to go with break the standard response and say, well, give me the good news first. What do you believe to be perhaps maybe the three main positive impacts coming from the current change, the dramatic change in our situation?
Thank you, Riz. I'd like to first start by saying it's really an honor and pleasure to have this conversation with Dr. Goodall. It is just amazing, and we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, Dr. Goodall, what you have done and what you are doing to really make this world a better place. So, Riz, to answer your question, I just want to give a little bit of or the viewers a little bit of a feedback as to where we were when this pandemic hit, so that I can tell you what are the three positive changes. About 2.5 years ago, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, the Vice President, Prime Minister and ruler of Dubai, when he gave me this file, he said, Mariam, I need you to make a plan. I need you to think of adopting technology and advancing R&D. Food security was always important to us, but the leadership really understood that It was time to do a transformation. It was time to disrupt the food systems, as to say. And in a way, we've got two food systems we're talking about, the way we produce food and also the way we consume food. And so I'm going to go into a bit of detail into those fields when, as we get along in the conversation. So I would say this pandemic, it made us think about accelerating in some of the things we were already planning to do, especially on looking at what we could grow more sustainably in the UAE. So because we are importing 90% of our food at the moment, so thinking of how we could really boost domestic production, and also on the other side, our consumption. It is sadly we have adopted a fast and convenience way of eating. We're not respecting food anymore. A lot of it is going into the waste. So I think now in the last 3 months, being at home and taking more meals at home, being with the family, I think it's given us time to rethink, reevaluate, and start to respect food a lot more. So I would say those are some of the takeaways of the positive things.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to go across to Dr. Goodall now and say three benefits you can see, ma'am.
Well, I think one's already been said very eloquently, and it's wonderful being with both of you for this conversation. But, you know, benefit that I have seen, where you see me is the home I grew up in. It's a family home. I'm on lockdown with my sister and her family. And what has been so wonderful was the quietness in the early days of lockdown, no traffic. And you could actually hear the birds singing. And I think for many people, looking up at night and seeing the stars shine brightly, especially in the big cities, instead of through a haze of pollution, or sometimes you couldn't see them at all, the pollution so bad. So a plus is that people have now learned what the world could be like and should be like, and they will be less, they will be extremely reluctant to return to the old polluted ways. So that's, you know, a really good takeaway. And secondly, I think more people are aware, at least I hope they are, that we've brought this pandemic on ourselves because of our disrespect of nature and animals, which I can talk about more clearly later. And then
I'll certainly get into those, yeah. Sorry.
No, I was going to say the third one would be, I've had messages from so many people saying, you know, I never realized what fun my teenage children were. And from the teenagers saying, you know, my parents are actually okay. We can have good conversations. And we found ways of playing games. They're sort of games I used to play as a child, but mostly aren't played anymore. So those are my three good takeaways.
Ironic, isn't it? Families rediscovering each other. Minister, I'll come back to you then, perhaps with the now give me the bad news.
So the bad news is we need to really rethink what we're doing to the environment, what we're doing to ourselves. I think when we start looking at, and I often reflect, if I look back at my grandparents and how they used to live here in the United Arab Emirates, they used to have the goat and sheep and camel at home. They had the palm tree, they were close to the sea. So they had their protein, their dairy, and there was quite a large percentage of self-sufficiency at home. And there was a lot of respect for food. Food was not wasted because they understood that food is it's God's blessings to have food. And I think over the years, as the UAE started developing, of course, the doors opened, many people came to the UAE. We've got over 200 nationalities here in the UAE. And so we basically became a global hub for food trade, just because our environment was also not made for large scale agriculture. So we brought in a lot of food, and because we had over 200 nationalities, everyone has their tastes and their ways of eating. So we wanted to make sure we cater for everyone, that everyone felt at home here. But going through that, there's a lot of bad things that bad habits that we've picked up as well. So in this pandemic, we're really realizing that our habits, our food habits are wrong. The food waste is a huge problem in the UAE, and we really have to tackle that. And there's a lot of work we have to do with the young people. We've been very blessed here in the UAE to grow up with food being available all the time. Our culture is very much about when we have guests, we love to show them all the dishes that we have in huge quantities. And these are certain, let's say, behaviors and habits that we need to start changing to become more sustainable. So I think going through this pandemic, we're seeing that there's a lot of things we're doing wrong. But I always see things as this is also an opportunity. Going through a crisis, we learn a lot. My team and I at the Food Security Office, what we've learned in the past weeks about, because we have such high dependencies on these global food supplies, we've learned a lot about who, let's say, who are our food strategic alliance countries and who are less. We know, for example, who are, what are the countries that are not putting up restrictions suddenly. We've been learning about all sorts of things when it comes to also the people's feedback. People are now saying, we'd love to start growing at home. So there's a lot of opportunities coming up now that we have to make use of. So I can't actually name 3 particular bad things. I'm just seeing them more as opportunities that we'd love to work on to actually take these on in a more accelerated approach.
I'll get to Dr. Goodall with this idea of, the downside. Perhaps adding in my particular fear is that the pendulum might swing the other way, and that when we come out of the lockdown, the kind of recession we've seen and the kind of impact it's had might make people overreact. I mean, there's even people talking about things such as revenge buying. People going and buying lots of things as soon as shops open because they're desperate to kind of compensate themselves with material goods. I'll just get your take on that, Dr. Goodall.
Yeah. Just run on toilet paper.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, the 3 bad things, to answer the first question, in brief. First of all, you mentioned it yourself, and that is that as tourism dries up in countries that depend on it, so we've seen a surge in poaching, partly because of the lack of ranger patrols and the big syndicates coming in, and partly because of local people who've lost their jobs and they just have to poach in order to eat. So that's one. And then the second one is so many people suffering because they've lost their jobs. They're frightened. They're afraid of the future, and they don't know how to feed their families. So yes, some of them, if they're lucky, can grow food in their gardens, but hundreds of them, think of lockdown in the inner city, lockdown in the African townships, absolute hell. And so that was a real downside. And then finally, to answer the last bit of your question, I think that as we come out of this pandemic, as I've said, I'm hoping there's a groundswell of people who don't want to go back to the old ways. But on the other hand, and particularly in some of our political leaders around the world, they can't wait to get back to business as usual. And opening up the country from lockdown, I think, too soon in some cases. And it's the same old thing, putting short-term economic gain before protection of the environment. And because of this damage to the world economy, it could well swing in the wrong direction, as you suggest, so that people are more destructive on the environment than ever in order to try and catch up on the loss.
If I may add, Riz, to what Dr. Goodall mentioned, is that look what we're doing now. We're hosting this virtually. We've basically saved on a lot of costs when it comes to traveling, etc. So I think a lot of the impactful events can be easily done in this way, saving a lot of pollution, air pollution, a lot of costs on the ground as well. So I think we're already going through disrupting certain systems. One of them being how we meet each other. This, of course, we mustn't forget the human side of things here. I mean, we're going through a crisis. People have suffered, they've lost their lives, the economic downturn, all these, of course, are extremely, there's a lot of loss and a lot of pain that a lot of people have gone through. We mustn't forget that. So that to be human and think of that human element is really important as we go back to the new normal, I call.
We have poll questions, which gives us a chance to get some of the people who have been, who are participating from around the world. I mean, it's amazing, 59 countries, and right now we've got about 1,500, maybe more people online. So I'm going to put the first of our 3 poll questions up here for people to vote on. It's a simple yes or no. And the question is quite simple. Can humanity sustain the positive benefits to our planet when life returns to normal? Can humanity sustain the positive benefits to our planet when life returns to normal? You just have to click yes or no, and hopefully you'll be able to get a result on that pretty quickly. So we'll look for that and see what people think, in tying into our conversation here about the outcome once the pandemic lockdown tries to return to normal. So there we go. We should have that poll up. Oh, here we go now. Okay, 64% believe that yes, humanity can sustain the positive benefits to our planet when life returns to normal. But a third, just over a third, 37%, which is interesting. The numbers don't add up entirely. 37% say no. So we have an interesting here. 2/3 believe, roughly 2/3 believe yes, and a third believe no. Just over a third believe no. That's going to be interesting. What do you make of that, Minister? While I've got you up on my screen.
Yes. We will definitely, as a government official, we definitely have identified, because we developed the strategy already in 2018, and food security is all about ensuring that citizens and residents of the country have access to safe, sufficient, nutritious, affordable food to live an active and healthy lifestyle, not only in normal situations, but also in emergencies and crisis. So this strategy had already laid the right foundation. And now, going through this crisis, there's certain programs that we have seen that we feel have gotten much more priority going through this. And as I mentioned before, in a way, it's the 2 systems that we want to disrupt to make them more sustainable. We want to look at what are the foods that make sense to grow in the UAE using technology. So I'll give you an example. Growing a kilogram of tomatoes in the UAE using technology, now you would only require 25 liters of water instead of 250 liters of water. So this is a huge difference. And then, of course, on the consumption side, there's a lot of education and awareness that we have to work on, so that people at the end of the day, they're the ones that are creating the demand, the pull. So they're the ones that are going to the supermarkets, they're choosing the foods. So things like traceability, educating them on how to read labels, understanding that why not buy local? Local is fresher, it's more nutritious, it's better for the environment as well. And it's most of the time also cleaner, because you don't have all the preservatives because it's coming a long way. So we hope we're going to push as much as possible from a government side with all the stakeholders that we're working with to ensure that all the benefits that we see and trying to push the food security agenda, that's done to make sure that we're basically becoming healthier as humans, and also ensure that the planet stays healthy too.
I have to say, I mean, 20 years in the UAE for me, and I'm now eating UAE grown blueberries, which is quite a nice delight, because I remember I used to have to look around for them as well. Dr. Goodall, on that vote, are you surprised that the optimism there, that 2/3 of people believe, yes, we can get to a better place?
Well, it would be fascinating, wouldn't it, to see where those people live who voted in the 2 different ways, because, you know, it really depends on the country. And I was on an interview yesterday with the Euro News, and in the middle of this little interview, they said, Dr. Goodall, we'd like you to comment on what President Trump just said. President Trump said, oh, I love the environment, I care about the environment, but can we maintain the kind of situation that we have in lockdown? Absolutely not. It can't happen. We can never have a green economy. We have to get back to business as usual. And getting back to business as usual, it spells doom for the future of the planet. And I'm afraid there are a number of political leaders who will feel exactly the same as Donald Trump, want to get back to business as usual. And I keep asking myself, these people, do they actually mean what they say? Do they actually care about the health of the planet? Do they actually care about their great-great-grandchildren? Because if we carry on with business as usual, you know, that already we're using up natural resources in some places faster than nature can replenish them. There's 7.2 billion of us now. In 2050, it's estimated there'll be 9.7 billion of us. And quite honestly, I don't know how the planet will cope unless we move in the direction of growing our own food, growing it more sustainably. But that's going to take time. And I don't know how much time we have. So I know, we know what we should do. We know what we want to do. Some countries are doing it. Other countries are rather far away from being able to attain that, even if they want to. I don't know what
Dr. Goodall, I want to follow up on something though that Mariam had said, and that is about how technology has benefited, in this case, the UAE, for example. Over the years that you've been dedicating your services to the planet in conservation and traveling around so much, how has technology changed the way that you're working, and how much has it benefited you?
Oh, we've benefited an enormous amount from technology. We've benefited. We can map chimps' range now with satellite imagery. The local people have learned how to use smartphones, and they go and monitor the health of their forests, and they indicate, you know, even if they can't read or write, they can press little buttons, and they chose themselves what they're going to record as a group. And this is in 104 villages in Tanzania and about the same number in Uganda. And so it all becomes transparent. It's all uploaded into a platform in the clouds, and people can see what's going on in the forest. It can't be hidden anymore. So forest destruction becomes visible. And also, you know, from outer space, you can monitor the destruction of the environment. We've also been able to use technology in our own research on chimpanzees. You can collect fecal samples, and for the first time we know who fathers which child, because chimps are very promiscuous. And we found there's rather more incest than we used to think. Not much, but more than we thought. So there's many different ways that we're using technology. And I've been talking to some scientists who are on cutting edge of creating technology that truly will enable us to live in greater harmony with nature. And if we think, I mean, I think UAE in many places is more or less off the grid with solar and wind energy, if I'm right. But, you know, countries like the US, they continue to subsidize the old oil and gas industry, and they actually tax the clean renewable energy. And this is the kind of thing that we've got to change. We have to change the leadership that isn't doing what's right for the future.
I want to get back to our minister in the UAE, because even in the time I've been here, 2 decades, it's been a phenomenal change in the UAE, and technology has been to a large degree at the root of that too. But the interesting thing with the UAE and its surrounding countries, the desert culture has always been one of conservation. Every drop of water is precious, every scrap of food is precious. And you mentioned earlier, you alluded to how people lived in the past. I wonder if, you know, looking at the way things are going forward, this wake-up call, as you've indicated, the way we consume food might change consumption habits, the way people buy and shop food, and the way they deal with food waste.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I always think, okay, what do we have here in the UAE? We've got, I call them the 3 S's. We've got the sun, we've got the sea, we've got the sand. So I always think, what could we produce with those 3 S's? Algae, for example, comes to my mind. Algae is also one of those, let's say, superfoods that humans can eat, but also animals can eat as well. And when you think of it doesn't need any fresh water, it doesn't need any arable land, and these are the kind of foods that I hope in the future to see much more of, especially here in the UAE. I'm thinking of also alternative proteins, insects. I know a lot of youth who I speak to, if I say, can you imagine the edible insects, the soldier fly, or a lot of them cringe, no way. But if we think about a chicken pecking on the ground and eating a dead fly, or a fish jumping up and snapping at an insect, we're eating those animals as well, or that fish. So maybe as a first phase to start looking at insects for animals, etc., so that we don't have that the animals, because we're feeding them and we're using land that could be used for something else to feed those animals. So there's a lot of things that we are very, we want to really push the agenda with in the future. And we're very blessed here in the UAE. Our leadership, they have foresight in their DNA. They're ready for change. They're ready for this transformation. They understand that the way we're going is not sustainable. And we have, because we have the political will and the right mindset, we believe we can be a knowledge hub for this transformation. And this is exactly what we want to do. We love saying the UAE is basically an open lab. We want to try out things and then share our experiences and knowledge with others, because we really believe that in order to not just be food secure today, but also food secure in future, there are things we need to change from now. And it's going to take time. I mean, changing behavior and changing the way people eat and the habits, this takes a lot of change. I mean, if I look at comparing my father with my son, there's a big difference. It's very difficult to change the way my father eats, but with my son, I can, there's a lot that I can do to basically show and make him understand and make him respect. And my duty, for example, is to make sure that he feels, or he feels guilty when he throws away food, and a lot of children don't. And for him to know, because we are in a country that imports a lot, you don't have the visuals. The kids don't grow up with how hard farming is, how hard it is to grow food, what is actually behind that, how much water goes into it, the work behind it. And a lot of them don't understand that if you're throwing away an apple, you're not just throwing away that apple, you're throwing away 70 liters of water with it. You're throwing away hours of work that people have worked on growing that. And so there is, I feel now going through this, also people are starting to think of their health, and they're thinking of, okay, I want to make sure I'm building my immunity. How can I build my immunity? How can I make sure that if I do get the virus, I can fight it off stronger? So they're very much more open to listening to, okay, I need to change my eating habits. So this is something we want to try and sort of use that opportunity. And also our leadership have gone out as well on live TV and said, really, we want you all to think of your consumption. It is absolutely not, it's not our value to throw away food. And this is not allowed. And these clear words have been said by our leadership. And it's really started a wave now that we're hopefully going to continue working on to try and push the levels.
On the subject of insects, I've always said to people, I mean, if you look at a shrimp or a prawn, it looks like the insect of the sea. So it is all psychological. But on this subject of what we consume and what's considered palatable, I'm going to bring up another poll question here. And I'm going to it'll lead me into the next section of questioning. But this poll question asks, will COVID-19 permanently change our appetite for consuming less conventional wild animal meat, with the risk of further viruses crossing the species barrier? Okay, so that's the question. Will COVID-19 permanently change our appetite for consuming less conventional wild animal meat, with the risk of further viruses crossing the species barrier? Yes or no? That's all you need to click on, one or the other. We should have a result in just a second. And it will lead me into looking at where we are with this whole subject. So let's see, it doesn't take long. Luckily now we can get the poll results pretty quickly. So And of course, it's cultural, it's diverse across geographies and people. So we will probably have quite a wide range here if we've got 59 countries on our list. Let's see. It comes up now. There we go. All right, 74%, so nearly 3/4 of the people who voted just now said yes, that it will change our appetite for sort of less conventional wild animal meat with the risk of this virus crossing the species barrier, while just over 1/4 say no, they don't think the appetite will change. And I want to bring in Dr. Jane Goodall here and say that's been one of the big issues that probably did come out of this whole pandemic, is the debate on what should and shouldn't we eat when it comes to these less conventional wild animals. And of course, quite horrifying what people have been seeing. But again, it's a cultural perspective. I want to get your take on it, please.
Yes, well, that was something I mentioned right at the beginning. I hoped we could come back to. One thing that more people are definitely aware of the fact that these so-called zoonotic diseases are spillover of a virus or bacteria from an animal to a person. And sometimes that can lead to a new disease like COVID-19, and that can be passed then from human to human. And it's thought that this particular pandemic began from a wild animal that was being sold in one of the wildlife meat markets of Asia. And by the way, wet markets are like farmers markets. Most of them do not sell wild animals. But these wild animal markets, you get animals coming from all different parts of the world sometimes. You get them in very unhygienic and extremely cruel conditions. And sometimes they're killed on the spot by people who want to get the fresh meat. And that so both the seller and the buyer can be contaminated with blood, feces, and so on. And this is a perfect environment for the virus to hop over. And in this case, it was successful. And in a way, we've been lucky because although it's incredibly contagious, the percentage of people who seem to die from catching COVID-19 is relatively low. Whereas supposing the next one, if we don't change our ways, is more like Ebola, where the percentage of people catching it is high, but it's equally contagious. So, you know, as I said at the beginning, I think it's our disrespect of nature and animals that has led to this pandemic, which has long been predicted by those studying these zoonotic diseases. And you know, it's not just people are pointing at China, it's all over Asia, these wildlife meat markets. And HIV/AIDS, for example, began from the bushmeat markets in Africa, in Central Africa. There was the MERS disease, which started from domestic dromedaries in the Middle East. I think it was Saudi Arabia, I'm not quite sure. And there's also our factory farms, these terrible, terrible concentration camps for animals, where again, animals crowded together, often unhygienic conditions. And again, this has led to the start of various diseases, none of which so far has become a pandemic, but the cruelty involved is absolutely shocking. And then the environment disrespect, forests are cut down. They're rich in biodiversity. Animal species are crowded together who normally wouldn't have much contact with each other. And there again, you can get a new disease starting as a virus goes from one animal to another. And so it's a melting pot of new diseases out there waiting to infect us with. And so we must change. And I'm very glad that percentage of people believe that it would change us. But, you know, it's not just wild animals. It can also come from mistreatment of domestic animals who, by the way, are sentient beings. And all of them, whether they're in a wildlife meat market or in a factory farm, they have personalities, they have feelings, they can feel fear and pain and despair.
Well, as someone who's almost vegetarian, I gave up red meat 23 years ago and then poultry last year. And I can say, I mean, I'm still a pescatarian, I guess, but I certainly hope that I'm trying to do something positive. And I wonder, when I put it to our minister, it's not just about the consumption of these unconventional wild animals. There is a need to also change how people consume in general, because you alluded to the fact when you have an apple, it takes so many liters of water to grow, and it's the same with agriculture. So take me a bit on that and how you think we need to change consumption habits.
Yeah, and in general, a lot of people ask me about that as well. It's so difficult to actually give you a one size fits all solution, because we all have our different traditions and our tastes, and so for me, in general, I say we're definitely eating too much meat, too much dairy, too much sugar. We need to cut those out, or if those want to choose to eliminate it. And definitely to increase the vegetable, fruit, nut, legumes, pulses. Those are the things. I also want to, I often, when I speak to the young people and also the elderly ones, protein doesn't necessarily mean it needs to come from a live animal. I think a lot of people just think, okay, proteins, it's just either white meat or red meat, or fish, but actually there's so many plant-based proteins now. And I think this has started to become very popular as well among the youth. So a lot of them, I mean, the young people, they sort of try to think of new trends that are coming up. And I often tell them it doesn't have to always be meat. Maybe have meat twice a week. This is also, if we look back at our grandparents and how they used to eat meat, it wasn't every day. Eating meat was something special. It was for a special occasion. But it's just at the moment when you look at the diets and you look at all the cancers and non-communicable diseases and heart diseases, it's all coming back to the fact of what we're eating and all the processed foods. We need to go back to natural foods, whole foods. We need to start looking at labels. The whole fast food industry is also something that for me, when I'm driving in the cities and we're seeing one fast food chain after the other, it's also something that we need to work on how we can bring that lifestyle into eating more at home, eating prepared foods, cooking. I'd love to see the men cooking more at home with the kids. It's something that I feel it's so much gone through the wrong way. And I think this pandemic, just being at home, eating more meals with the kids, being around the kitchen more, I think it's a good way to start looking at this shift that we'd like to do.
I'm going to actually bring in a question here that we had from one of our participants around the world. It doesn't say exactly where, but Raman Rajesh wrote in, and I'm going to put you both on the spot a little bit here, or at least Raman is. Are the speakers on this occasion vegans, as the webinar is on sustainability and animal agriculture is not sustainable? Now, I have to say, I tried to be vegan. I lasted 2 days when my daughter told me, well, you can't have honey. Apparently I can't have figs because wasps lay their eggs in them. I don't know. But vegan was very hard. I would love to be able to be vegan. I would. But if you want to answer it, are you vegan, or are you in any way, how's your diet varied, let's say, with your level? Minister first and then perhaps Dr. Goodall.
Okay. Definitely, since I've got hold of this file, I'm a lot more aware of what I'm eating. I'm not a vegan. But I'm definitely trying to reduce the meats, the dairies, eating more fish, and trying to eat a lot more of the plant-based proteins. So quinoa, oats, chickpeas, those are all things I wasn't eating a lot of before. So I am shifting this slowly but surely. I am in a household where I'm not on my own. There are other people with me in the family. So it's slowly but surely. I do have long conversations with them about let's try and do this, or let's try and do this. And I know they're all listening in at the moment. There is a movement happening. There is a shift happening. And there are members of our family that have shifted, and one of them has become vegan just about a month ago or 2 months ago. So I'm seeing there is a change happening.
As you indicated, Minister, there's also the issue that, of course, even if it's not kind of directly cutting everything out, it's just a good step to start reducing, and that's a big factor. Yeah. Dr. Goodall, I'm putting you on the spot there. I'm asking you whether you're vegan or in any way aware of what, careful of what you eat.
when I'm here at home, I'm virtually vegan. When I'm traveling, I used to be 300 days a year on the road. It's really difficult. But I certainly don't eat meat or fish or anything like that. And by the way, eating fish, almost every fish now is polluted with plastic because of the little, little bits of plastic floating around in the ocean. So fish actually isn't very good for you. But, I grew up in World War II, and we too had to be really careful. Every mouthful of food was precious. 1 square of chocolate a week, that was it. So we learned never to take food for granted. And the reason we had meat once a week in the war, could afford more. The reason that I quit eating meat, chicken, fish, and so forth, is that having learned about the factory farms and the treatment of the animals there, the next time I looked at a piece of meat on my plate, I thought, this is symbolic. Fear, pain, and death. I don't want that inside my body. And, the more you learn about dairy farming and poultry farming, it's horrendous and it's not good for us. The animals are given antibiotics just to keep them alive. That's given rise to the superbugs so that people die from a scratch on a finger. And, the effect on the environment of factory farming, it's huge areas of land cut down to make way for growing grain to feed the animals. More grain grown to feed animals now than to feed starving people, which is appalling, but that happens to be true. And then lots of fossil fuel used to get the grain to the animals to the abattoir, and the meat to the table. Water, huge amounts of water to change vegetable to animal protein. And so, the closer we can get to being vegan, the better for the planet. And I love you bringing in algae, Mariam, because that really is a way for, it's better than insects even, poor old insects. You can teach bumblebees tricks. Can you believe that? Bumblebees can be taught tricks. They can be taught to roll a little bead, and if they drop it down a hole, they get a reward. Other bumblebees who've never been trained can do the same thing first go just by watching the trained bumblebee.
Well, hopefully we won't
another point, Riz, that I wanted to add was the biodiversity point. We've also, in some of our R&D work, Salicornia, it's a kind of vegetable that grows in seawater. So this is another thing that I hope to push as well, is that we start looking at what vegetables or what foods grow in our environments. And these are the ones that we should be introducing into our diets as well. So Salicornia, for those who are listening in, it looks like asparagus. They're like sea beans. So they're a bit of like salty asparagus. And we've started growing them, and there's now a company using them to make some crackers. So they're not putting any salt in it. They're just using the Salicornia to have a bit of a salty cracker. So that's another thing, looking at biodiversity.
Lots of people eat seaweed too. Lots of people eat seaweed.
Of course. In 1992, I went to Miami where my brother lives. He's been there since about 1991. And I remember going for a healthy smoothie. And this wasn't really something I saw anywhere else for quite a few years. But he said, and get some spirulina in it. And I had no clue what spirulina was. And of course, now it's all widely available. And even here in the UAE, I'm finding everything, actually finding it more advanced than many other places I go, which is a blessing. I'm going to bring in another viewer question here because we had a woman called Jane Canavan who says, because you mentioned, Minister, your young son, she says, I'm watching with my daughter, aged 11. What advice do you have for young people? What can they do to make a difference?
So my advice is to start at home. It's really important to educate the kids about food, where food comes from. There are, for example, here in the UAE, we've got the Emirates Bio Farm that people can visit, and they can then pick out their vegetables and take it home with them. I think we need to expose our children a lot more to the farms that are available here, that are using technology as well. We've got, as you mentioned, we've got blueberries now being grown in the UAE. A lot of fish farms are now coming up as well, and also quinoa, vegetables, all sorts, and I feel when kids get exposed to how foods are grown, they respect it a lot more. I also think it's important for the young people to help in the household not to waste food. So try and make it a challenge at home to say we're not going to waste any food. There are so many ways. You either keep your excess food for the next meal, or you give it to someone who you know who could be so thankful to get a meal. There are food banks here in the UAE, so it does not have to go to waste. And unfortunately, we are creating a lot of food waste here in the UAE. And this is something that we must stop. And I think with the kids, this is an excellent way to start and make it as a challenge first. Let's try this week and not create any food waste. So those are some pieces of advice. And cook with them. Let the kids cook with you. A lot of in the Arabic or in the national households, we have a lot of people who work with us at home, and I feel a lot of the kids are not let into the kitchen. It's kind of like, no, this is the danger zone. Don't let the kids in. There's a hot stove. There are knives. But I think we should empower the kids. Let them come in. Let them discover. Let them taste. Let them be part of cooking a meal.
I know I was brought up with this kind of clean everything on your plate, you know, I had to finish everything. But I think then it took me a while to get the psychology of I don't need to put so much stuff on my plate in the first place, perhaps. Yes. And I think that was education. Dr. Goodall, it's interesting because you've inspired generations. I mean, young people, older people, they all follow your adventures and, of course, your philosophy. And I wonder what your advice is or what your answer is to Jane, who wrote in that question about advice to young people. First step.
Well, ever since '91, I've been working very hard to grow our youth program, which, by the way, is all over the UAE. Mm-hmm. I forget the number of groups, but it's around 100 yes. Or more. But this program began because I met so many young people. These were mostly high school and university, and they seemed to have little hope for our future. And they said to me, you've compromised our future. There's nothing we can do about it. So they were depressed, angry, or mostly apathetic. And we have compromised their future. You hear we haven't inherited this planet from our ancestors. We borrowed it from our children. We haven't been borrowing their future. We've been stealing it. And we're still stealing it now. So, but I believe we have this window of time, and I don't believe it's a very big window. And in that time, if you empower young people, if you listen to their voices and enable them to take action, it's amazing what they can do. So what began with 12 high school students in Tanzania, we called it Roots and Shoots, the roots of a tree and the shoots and how they can break through rocks to reach the water and the sun. And the main message is each single one of us make some impact every single day. And if we're lucky enough to live in relatively affluent societies, we have the luxury of making choices in what we buy and what we eat. On the other hand, if we're one of the billions growing up in poverty, we don't have that choice. People just have to do whatever they can do to get by day. But because the world is all interconnected, we decided from the very beginning, me and these 12 students, that each group of Roots and Shoots, because right then we determined this was going to grow, would choose 3 projects to make the world better. One for people, one for animals, one for the environment, because we're all in this together. And from that small beginning, we're now in 66 countries. We have hundreds and thousands of groups with members from kindergarten, university, and everything in between. We have what I call the alumni, those people who were in the program at school or university and have now moved on into positions in adult society. And for example, when I go to China, people come up to me and say, but of course I care about the environment. I was in your Roots and Shoots program in primary school. Of course I care about animals. I was able to watch your chimpanzee documentaries in school in Roots and Shoots. So I'm very passionate about growing this program. And the reason I'm passionate is A, I've seen the difference that they're making. It's not just that young people can make a difference, they flipping are. They are clearing streams, clearing litter. They're working on the production of palm oil unsustainably. They're raising money for earthquake victims or migrants. You name it, they're doing it. They volunteer in soup kitchens, you know, they do. And because they get to choose and we don't dictate, they're passionate about what they do, and they don't all have to do everything, but they have to share what they're doing so that they understand the interconnection of everything.
Yeah,
so
it is about education.
It's about education, and that, you know, we have groups passionate about climate change and everything we've been talking about, living sustainably. You know, if we don't do it, this climate crisis will see the end of life on this planet as we know it.
And actually, I should point out, you and I are both in a book, The World is Just a Book Away. James Owens, the founder, is a mutual friend of ours. And he attended here the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. And again, it's all about the education, creating libraries for children in
Indonesia.
areas.
And we're working together now. So we've got roots and shoots groups for all across Indonesia, Malaysia, China, Taiwan.
Fantastic. I'm going to squeeze in one last poll question here, because we had this, we're talking about from a government perspective and obviously from an activist perspective. This poll question is, will there be an urgent need for governments to drive self-sufficiency of food production using technology and sustainable methods instead of importing what we consume? And I guess this obviously is something we've discussed. Will there be an urgent need for governments to drive self-sufficiency of food production using technology and sustainable methods instead of importing what we consume? Yes or no? We'll get a vote on that in a second. And of course, our minister from the UAE has been discussing how the UAE has been pushing the self-sufficiency through technology as well, to create sustainable methods of food growth. So let's see what our participants from around the world say. The result is, well, 96%. Well, that's nice we had that poll. 96% believe there is an urgent need for governments to do that, to drive self-sufficiency of food production. Only 4% saying no there. And thank you very much for taking part with those poll questions, everyone around the world who's watching this now. Let me get your take on that, Dr. Goodall, because of course we heard the minister discussing how the UAE is doing it. Is it the responsibility of governments now to really take the lead?
Well, at the moment in many countries, it's the NGOs that are taking the lead rather than the governments. But we, the Jane Goodall Institute, we've been working now for many years in Tanzania, Uganda, and 5 other African countries. And it was when I flew over the little tiny Gombe National Park, it was part of a forest going right across Africa. By 1990, it was just a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. People had over-farmed the land, cutting down the trees in their desperation to try and grow more food. And that's when it hit me. We can't even try to save the chimpanzees while people are struggling to survive. So we began our program called Take Care, or Takari, which is a way for, well, the villagers told us what we could do to make their lives better. Creating more food was a major one. So we've been developing with them ways of promoting small-scale and family farming. And so, you know, one example around Gombe, there are now over 1,000 small-scale farms where they grow shade-grown coffee, mixed in with other crops, so that there's a lot of diversity, and the animals and the insects can come back. And, you know, a healthy environment needs its biodiversity, and we're destroying it so fast. So anyway, this program, Takari, has become really successful. It's right throughout the chimp range in Tanzania, and also in Uganda and DRC and the Republic of Congo and Burundi. And it's all of it is moving away from large-scale agriculture, from the monocultures, from the genetically modified foods. Because, you know, if you get a disease sweeping across a field of genetically modified crops, that's the end of it. But the small-scale family farms that work on diversity and using the old skills of the kind of plants that can survive in a hostile environment. They can cope better with changes in climate that we're seeing now. So yes, I'm glad that 96% of people agree that governments too should push this.
As we kind of wrap up, I'm going to put this to the minister now as well, because of course, global cooperation has got to be essential, I guess, when, you know, if we're going to reach nearly 10 billion people in the next 30 years. How do you see partnerships between the state actors and the global food organizations in trying to resolve this? How can that global cooperation be kickstarted and really implemented?
Well, global cooperation is an integral policy within the Food Security Office. And actually it is one of the, if we think of our late founding father, His Highness Sheikh Zayed, he basically planted the seed of how important partnerships are. The UAE would not be where it is today without partnerships. It's extremely important in all situations, and even now going through a crisis, we've seen how important it is to have partnerships, how it's extremely important to be helping each other. And if we look at the food security file, there's quite a lot of, let's say, projects that we've assisted on, or we've been doing partnerships with. For example, the UAE has supported the UN's Committee on World Food Security to try and achieve the food security and nutrition related SDG goals. We've also, just 2 weeks ago, we signed agreements with the FAO on basically transforming food system solutions, and also looking at how we can enhance nutrition. So there's a lot going on there, and we definitely believe, and it's not just for the UAE, we want to serve the region as well. We want to help other countries that are facing the same challenges that we are as well, to not just look at food security from a point of a national priority, but also to be a global player is really important for us. So yes, extremely important for us. Partnerships and forging them, extremely important.
Well, as we wrap up, there's always so many questions, never enough time. Thank you both for being partners in this discussion. Dr. Goodall, Your Excellency, thanks for joining us for this discussion here. I'm going to now hand over to the CEO and trustee of the Emirates Literature Foundation, Isabel Abulhul, who'll kind of wrap things up for us. But thank you also for all of you around the world joining us for this conversation. I hope it was informative and valuable. Thank you so much for all that input, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too for moderating for us.
I just lost for words. A huge thank you to Her Excellency Mariam Mehairi, Dr. Jane Goodall, and wonderful Riz Khan for a most groundbreaking conversation. You really fitted in a huge amount of things for all of us to think about across the world. This would not have been possible without the support of the Office of Public and Cultural Diplomacy. Thank you to you. And of course, thank you to the thousands of people from 59 countries around the world who welcomed us into their homes tonight and made it possible to have a conversation across borders, across the world. This project started life as a traveling project, but given the pandemic, it's magically transformed itself into something even better. Please do join us next Saturday, the 13th of June, when His Excellency Omar Gabash and Leslie Hazelton will be discussing, will science be the new religion in the post-pandemic world? I want to send best wishes from everyone in the UAE to all our fellow human beings across borders and across the world. And I'm delighted, finally, to ask Dr. Jane Goodall to introduce a beautiful video that's going to bring our session to a close. And also, please check out Roots and Shoots, the Jane Goodall wonderful initiative that is helping young people around the world make a positive difference and empowering them. So huge thank you to each of you. And over to Jane Goodall. Many, many thanks.
Okay, well, this last video is, for me, it's one of the most moving experiences I've had in my long 86 years on this planet. And across Africa, many chimpanzee infants are orphaned because their mothers are shot for bushmeat, or to steal the infant to sell it, which is illegal. So we can confiscate these orphans, but we have to then look after them. You can't put them back in the forest. They need their mothers and their family. So this video is about one chimpanzee who came in as a tiny baby, was really, she'd been wounded by the bullet that killed her mother. She was in a very bad way. Our wonderful veterinarian who runs this biggest sanctuary in Africa for chimpanzees in the Republic of Congo, she was rescued from near death. Then when she was about 8 years old, she got another sickness, and again she nearly died, and again Rebecca saved her. So the extraordinary thing about this video, when you watch it, this was the first day that I met this chimpanzee Wunda. Wunda in the local language means close to death. So just watch this and try and get the feeling that I had of this is an amazing communication. It shows how close we are to animals. This is a really exciting moment for me. The Jane Goodall Institute's Chimpunga Chimpanzee Rehabilitation Center in the Republic of Congo has for years been caring for infants whose mothers were killed, mostly for the illegal bushmeat trade. Many of them are now fully grown. Recently, we acquired 3 large forested islands on the beautiful Kwilu River, where we can release many of the chimpanzees from our overcrowded center. In here is Wunda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead. And here she is about to come out into this paradise. She's the 15th chimpanzee to get her freedom here. And we hope ultimately to have about 60 on the island. Today is the first time I've met Wunda. I talked to her on the boat, trying to reassure her. She must have wondered what was happening. None of us could predict exactly what she would do once the cage door opened. It was a very, very touching moment. One of the most amazing things that's ever happened to me. The warmth of her embrace is something I shall never forget. For Wunda and all the other chimpanzees we're working to bring here, Chinzula Island will provide a wonderful forest home where they will be cared for and safe.